On Election Day, November 3rd, I posted videos on YouTube predicting a Trump win. Tonight, November 5th, pundits are claiming Biden has secured 264 of the 270 electoral votes he needs to win, while Trump needs another 56, and that the president only has a 10% chance. Many are losing hope, but I assure you that my predictions are correct. Donald J. Trump will receive another 4 years to complete the job entrusted to him by God. I also explained in those videos that the soul of Isser, the brother of Jacob, now resides in the heart of our president. Isaac's prayers that the brothers will work together as a team and fight for God were finally answered. Isser was also Yishmael's son-in-law. He married Yishmael's daughter, Machlat, as recorded in Genesis 28. And that's why it makes perfect sense that Trump was instrumental in bringing about the fulfillment of Abraham's prayers, that Yishmael will one day work together with Isaac. Under the leadership of our president, one Arab nation after another are embracing the Jews of Israel with a sincere desire to work together for the betterment of both peoples. And under the president's leadership in his second term, many more will join the so very appropriately named Abraham Accords. True, Isser was not granted the power of refined speech. As Isaac declared in Genesis 27, the voice is Jacob's voice, but the hands are the hands of Isser. Donald Trump is a doer. Biden is a talker. In fact, the very Hebrew word Isser is related to the Hebrew word for action, asiyah. Isser was destined to be a fighter, al charbecha tichya, you will live by the sword. And for centuries, the Romans, followed by the Christians, Isser progeny, were indeed very bloodthirsty. But the new transformed Isser, as embodied by President Trump, is the exact opposite. He is a complete Baal Tshuva. Yes, he is a fighter, but he uses his sword to protect, not to attack. He is also fearless, and he will use the sword when there is no other choice. Like when he had to eliminate ISIS leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, or Iran's master terrorist Qassam Soleimani. Taking out these two vicious lowlifes saved the lives of thousands upon thousands of their future victims. He rebuilt the military only as a deterrent to actually avoid bloody wars. He uses his strength to negotiate peace rather than to destroy his enemies. He is against the killing of the most vulnerable of our society, unborn babies. But a fighter he is, and he will continue to fight for God and for good, and for God's people in the Holy Land. Now let's talk a little about his opponent, Joe Biden, and what he represents. As we shall soon see, this election is not about the economy and taxes, or about climate change, or about how to deal with COVID. This election is about an epic cosmic battle of the highest order. In the words of Moses in Exodus 32, later echoed by Yehuda the Maccabee, Mi lahashem Elai, who is willing to stand up for God, please join me. In order to understand what is really behind this election, we need to go back a very long time and to a faraway place. 5,700 years ago, 780 years ago in the Garden of Eden. You know the story. It's recorded in Genesis chapter 3. It is the most famous story in the Bible. Let's read. The serpent was the most cunning of all the wild beasts that God had made. He asked the woman, "Did God really say that you may not eat from any of the trees in the garden?" The woman replied to the serpent, "We may eat from the fruit of the trees of the garden, but only of the fruit of the tree that is in the middle of the garden did God say, 'Do not even touch it, or else we will die.'" "You will certainly not die," said the serpent to the woman. "God knows that the day you will eat from it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." You know the rest of the story. But let me fill you in on what was actually happening. God created the world because he wanted to have a meaningful relationship with mankind. The essence of God is pure love. And he decided that the best way to share his love and all of his goodness is in the context of a relationship. However, him being the giver and mankind the recipient would not do justice to his desire to share his ultimate goodness. People do not appreciate things given to them for free. They need to feel they deserve it. They worked for it. Only then do they feel that it is truly theirs. So there has to be a challenge. Choosing God would have to be something difficult if it was to be meaningful. Choosing a virtuous moral life would have to be something that does not come easy. Then, when it is actually achieved, we feel proud of our achievement and we feel it is truly ours. In order to create an environment which offers a challenge, God created two types of beings. One of them with a mind that has the power to choose right from wrong. They are human beings with a soul and a conscience. They are the purpose of creation. There were only two of them in the beginning, Adam and Eve. The other beings he created did not have that power. They only had instincts. They don't have a mind that could control the passions of their heart. They were animals. And they were created to present a challenge to the humans. Animals are not bad. In fact, they are perfect. They do exactly what God programmed them to do. Predators kill for survival because that's how they were programmed. Animals procreate and care for their young, not out of moral choice, but because that's how they were programmed. In the Garden of Eden, man and animal looked similar. They all stood upright and were able to speak and communicate. They also could interbreed with one another. In order to challenge Adam and Eve so that their choices would be meaningful, God appointed the serpent. He was the most cunning of all animals and best suited for this mission to seduce Eve into ignoring God's word. He needed to put on a very good show and pretend as if he was looking out for her well-being. He approached her and said, "Religion is the opium of the masses. It is meant to control you and restrict you from being who you really are. It is meant to take away your freedom and your pleasure. It is meant to complicate your life and cause you stress. Look at me and all my animal friends. We are always so calm. We are not plagued with moral dilemmas. We don't have a conscience to inhibit us from fulfilling our every desire. We do what we want to do." Sadly, the serpent man succeeded. He seduced Eve. He actually slept with her. Remember, he looked exactly like a human being. Maybe he had pointy ears like Spock, or maybe some other feature of distinction like the human-like aliens on Star Trek or Star Wars. I don't know, but he was very human-like. And he injected his animalistic genes into mankind. After his mission was accomplished, there was no need for animals to look like humans anymore. It was only done to help the serpent succeed in his deceptive pitch to Eve. They were all kicked out of the Garden of Eden, and henceforth the serpent now resided inside the heart of every human being. Animals would now look like animals and roam the earth on all fours, signifying that their head is not higher than their hearts, and that they have no soul to control their instincts. Sadly, the challenge facing mankind after the first humans failed their challenge was now 10 times harder. The snake became a permanent dweller in every human being's heart, and he works overtime day and night to seduce us into ignoring the word of God. The call of God which demands restraint and control over our passions and egos, a call which demands selflessness and devotion to help other human beings rather than being totally absorbed in our own needs and desires. The challenge posed by the inner serpent, our Yetzer Hara, proved to be insurmountable. After 1600 years from the original sin, God realized that it was hopeless. There was no way mankind was going to succeed. Generations were becoming more and more selfish, corrupt, decadent, mean, and heartless. The world needed a restart. However, Noah and his family exited the ark the same way they entered, imperfect. The serpent who dwelled in their hearts was also saved from the flood. Canaan, one of the four sons of Chum, had a particularly dangerous serpent pulsating in his heart. It didn't take long for mankind to prove once more that they cannot succeed on their own. God would have to get more involved. God would give mankind a detailed manual with instructions how to lead every aspect of their lives, how to control our wants and desires, how to perfect our personalities, and now God had to choose a family willing to take these teachings and bring them to the rest of mankind. A world which would be hostile to this message and would try with all their might to silence the messenger. God was looking for someone with enormous tenacity, courage, and fortitude who would agree to take on this nearly impossible mission. Once he found his man, God would then ensure that these stubborn genes would be inherited by his descendants. Only then would mankind have hope. We know the rest of the story. Abraham was chosen. His son Isaac was chosen to keep it going. And for now, Yishmael was excluded. He was not up to the challenge at that point. Isaac's son Jacob was chosen. For now, his brother Esau was excluded. He too was not yet up to the challenge. Jacob's family were enslaved in Egypt for over 200 years. They learned firsthand what it means to be treated like subhumans, and they vowed never to do that to anybody else. They accepted the task to teach all of mankind to cherish the uniqueness and importance of every single human being. And against all odds, the Jews were wildly successful. It took a long time. The price tag was huge. Unimaginable hatred was directed against them everywhere they went. Suffering beyond description, expulsions, pogroms, inquisitions, and finally the Holocaust. It took a very long time. But over 3,000 years after the Jews accepted the Torah, a huge portion of mankind has come to accept the truth of the most famous line in our Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These truths were not actually so self-evident for the bulk of human history. Not one single culture, race, ethnicity, or religion ever promoted this truth on their own accord. The Jews didn't figure it out on their own either. It was revealed to the Jewish people by God in His Torah. The United States was the first and only country founded on these principles. Many words of our Torah became embedded in American culture. In God we trust is proudly proclaimed on every single piece of U.S. currency. It is based on the words of King David in Psalm 40, Ashrei HaGever Asher Som Hashem Miftachoi. And who is not familiar with the verse inscribed on the Liberty Bell in Pennsylvania, Ukarosem Dror Ba'oretz L'chol Yeshveho, Leviticus 25, proclaim liberty throughout all the land unto all the inhabitants thereof. From the early days of America's founding, it has been a struggle. We have had our ups and downs, but the general trajectory has always been in the right direction. We are doing very well as far as eradicating racism. There is still some ways to go, but we are definitely going in the right direction and fast. In the 1960s, almost half of white respondents in the U.S. suggested that they would move if a black family moved in next door. That proportion is down to 5% today. The media has brainwashed the majority of Americans to believe that racism is systemic in America and a huge problem. This is a blatant lie. Only a very small percent of Americans still harbor racist feelings. And that applies to the police as well. The overwhelming majority are devoted public servants. Of course, there's a small share of rotten apples. Every group has them, and so do the blacks. Anti-Semitism in America has also been reduced to only a fraction of the fringes of the general population. Of course, we need to work harder to completely eradicate racism and anti-Semitism, but we have gone a long way and we will keep going in that direction under the right leadership. We need leaders like President Trump who realize how great we have become and who are working towards making us even greater. Leaders who are mouthpieces for the lies perpetuated by the fake media that America, after electing a black president for 2 terms, is still a horribly racist country, only serve to destroy our confidence and well-deserved sense of accomplishment and ensure that we will go backward, not forward. Sadly, as we are moving closer and closer to the time of redemption, the serpent who dwells in the hearts of all mankind is fighting for his life with ferocious intensity. In the last few decades, people seriously infected with this selfish, self-centered, and power-hungry nature have taken control of our judiciary, the mainstream media, and much more seriously, our educational institutions. God has been banned from our public and elementary high schools. Morality has been banned from our colleges and universities. The very first mitzvah in the Torah was God's instruction to Adam and Eve to have children and raise a family. that a man should marry a woman and they should raise moral, upstanding, God-fearing children. Remember the primordial serpent's seductive words to Eve. Who cares what God says? Follow your passions and desires, not the narrow-minded dogmas of religion. Free yourself from the shackles of your consciousness. He is back in full force with his seductive and destructive arguments. You don't need to be a man, you don't need to be a woman, and you don't need to have children. And you surely don't need to raise them to fear God and to forego on any of their passions and desires, regardless of how self-centered and destructive they are. How painfully ugly is it that they have adopted the rainbow as their logo. The rainbow was first introduced to Noah after he emerged from the ark as a sign of life and the expansion and growth of mankind through the efforts of the nuclear family. The left has stolen it from God and used it to symbolize the exact opposite, their sick agenda of destroying family life. This has nothing to do with freedom. They aggressively work to silence the free speech of anyone who doesn't fall in for their shenanigans. They have taken control of the media and our educational systems, and through them, this self-destructive nonsense has seized control of the hearts of large numbers of our countrymen. They have complete control over the Democratic Party and their puppet Joe Biden. The serpent is so cunning. He does not equate this movement with self-centeredness, selfishness, unbridled egoism, or unrestrained hedonism. Killing an unborn child because it is inconvenient to bring them to term and have them adopted by loving parents who are desperate for a child is not a selfish act. It is simply a woman expressing her freedom of choice. Mobs of violent protesters destroying people's businesses and lives are not thugs and criminals. They are simply beautiful human beings who are expressing their frustrations the only way they know how. Yes, of course, Black lives matter. The life of every human being matters. Skin color is totally irrelevant. Racism is a anathema to the Jewish people. There are Jews of every color and race. It is our precious Torah that taught the world that every single human being, regardless of race or color, was created in the image of God. And black people are no different than any other group. There are great black people, there are good black people, there are average black people, and there are bad black people. The same grouping applies to every single race, nationality, and religion. And of course, there are good Jews and there are bad Jews. In each group, the majority are not the bad ones. And of course, that applies to the blacks as well. Some of the most amazing and successful people in this country are black. But like every other group, not all blacks are good. The ones that walk over to innocent Jews and even to women and children in Brooklyn and punch them in the face for no reason, or kick off their yarmulke or rip off their sheitel are the bad ones. Sadly, the percentage of anti-Semitism among blacks is 4 times higher than the general population. Check it out on Wikipedia under Anti-Semitism in America. And the leaders of the Black Lives Matter movement belong to this latter group, and they basically control the democratic narrative. The primordial serpent looked like a handsome human being so that he can seduce Eve. And Joe Biden looks like a nice guy so that he can seduce half of America. But he is only the skin of the serpent. The soul pulsating under his costume is that of the anti-Semites, Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, leaders of the BLM, and all the other infected souls of the radical left. They are very cunning. They have convinced the naive members of the Democratic Party that radical Islamic terrorists blowing up buses full of women and children are not vicious, bloodthirsty animals. They have convinced the world that the Palestinians are a peace-loving people who have been cheated out of a state, that the bloodthirsty Jew-hating culture which has infected 90% of their population, who sing and dance at the sight of a blown-up Jewish baby, are really the nicest of people. They are simply frustrated because the Jews decided to come back to their homeland and refused to gift it to the Arabs so that they can establish a 22nd state. Who could blame half of our fellow Americans that are being seduced with this nonsense? If the very first woman, who was a perfect human being, created by the hands of God, succumbed to the seduction of the primordial serpent. We do not blame these people. We surely do not hate these people. In fact, we love them. But we cannot allow them to destroy our world and destroy their own lives. If you feel any hatred towards radical left Democrats, I must inform you that this too is coming from the Yetzer Hara, the serpent gene that unfortunately lives in your heart as well. If you seek to harm them in any way, emotionally, financially, and surely physically, then you have been completely hijacked by the primordial serpent. But without hate, but with a firm resolve, we have to do everything in our power to stop the left from destroying America and squash the last hope to bring God's world toward its ultimate goal, We must deal with them the same way we would deal with somebody who's standing on a bridge and wants to kill themselves. We need to try to stop them with all our might from hurting themselves and hurting the rest of the world. We need to fight, not with hate, not with fists, God forbid, but with love, sensitivity, and understanding. But fight we must. Allowing a young child to undergo irreversible gender-changing therapy, it's not a beautiful display of freedom, as the Serpent would have us believe. It is cruelty of the highest order. Allowing a woman to kill her unborn child is not, as the Serpent has cynically termed it, pro-choice. It is cruelty of the highest order. My dear friends, this election is not between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. This election is between the Serpent who slithers in every human heart and the godly soul that resides even deeper within. As the time of our redemption is nearing, there is no question that God's plan will come to fruition. Mankind will prove themselves ready for the next stage in human history, when the Messiah will bring about the redemption of the Jewish people and of all mankind. That is why I am 100% certain that Donald Trump, who has been chosen to fight the war of God and stand up for God's chosen people, will be given the opportunity to finish the job. Trump single-handedly destroyed the credibility of the mainstream media. The term fake news has become a permanent staple in the language of all Americans. He has also destroyed the fake narrative which gripped almost the entire Western world, including all previous U.S. administrations for decades. I'm referring to the cynical narrative that peace in the Middle East will only be accomplished when those lousy and xenophobic Jews chop off half of their God-given homeland and award it to the bloodthirsty, terrorist-supporting, corrupt dictator Mohammed Abbas, Yimach Shemay. Trump has instructed the 70th Secretary of State, the righteous Mike Pompeo, to undo the historic travesty perpetuated by his namesake, the Roman general Pompey, who seized control of Jerusalem from the Jews 61 years before the Common Era. In my next video, I will share with you what Trump needs to accomplish in his second term. And this mission, that only he can accomplish, increases my certainty that he will be granted another 4 years. Not 100%, but I am 1,000% sure. Stay tuned.